I'm Dean, I'm the dad.
I'm Laura, I'm the mom.
And I'm Arthur, I'm the son.
And together we are...
Family Plot.
Plot Podcast is the best history podcast that we can make.
Like intellectual pancakes for the soul.
I've been called the cool dad you want to take a road trip with and learn about history from.
One of our listeners said listening to me was like mom reading you a bedtime story full of cool history, and I am here for it.
And one of our reviewers called me the snarky brother they wish they had.
So join us to learn some cool stuff,
to hear some fun banter and wild tangents.
And we are unabashedly LGBTQ friendly and trans positive and supportive.
And remember,
when you listen, you're our
family.
So join us and occasionally some very cool guests
for the Family Plot Podcast.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
The Murder Shelf Book Club contains disturbing content related to real-life crimes. Listener discretion is advised.
We all have intolerable thoughts locked deep in our psyches. We keep them at bay in different ways. The healthiest? Sublimate them into harmless outward representations. Unacceptable impulses to hurt others are sometimes disguised. For example, into jokes or drives to help the same people. But however you and I handle our hidden repugnant or forbidden urges, we don't do what Holmes did. We don't purchase psychological relief by killing people. From A Dark Night in Aurora by Dr. William H. Reed, M.D. Well, welcome to the Murder Shelf Book Club podcast. I am your host, Jill. We are starting Part 2, Episode 132, Ultraception, on A Dark Night in Aurora, inside James Holmes and the Colorado mass shooting by Dr. William H. Reed, M.D., and Dr. Lynne Fenton's book, Aurora, the psychiatrist who treated the movie theater killer. Both contributed to our understanding of the horror that occurred in Aurora, Colorado on July 20th, 2012. My complete list of sources is on my blog at www.murdershelfbookclub.com, July 2025. And it has photos, links, recipes, drink recommendations, that kind of thing. So check it out. I also hope you enjoyed my conversation with B.R. Bates about her new true crime book on a lesser-known serial killer, Benjamin Atkins. Lots of theories and ideas were tossed around in our efforts to understand his motivation. So please let me know what you think, murder bookies. And tomorrow night is our August 2025 Patreon Zoom, and I am doing my first serial killer class for you. Thank you for joining Patreon and for supporting the podcast and my endeavors. I am really excited about this. And it's not too late. For $2 or $4 a month, you can join Patreon at www.patreon.com/MurderShelfBookClub. And CrimeCon is 3 weeks away? I am on Creators Row, and I cannot wait to see you. Presenting at CrimeCon Denver in September, 5th to the 7th, are Aurora's Police Department's own Captain Jad Lanigan and Commander Mike Daly. So this will be an essential trilogy for you to hear before attending CrimeCon. Download it before you travel to Colorado and just listen on the way. And murder bookies, Friday night, I will be at the Embers Bar around 9 p.m. Gosh, so much is happening. Now, in my previous episode, Part 1, which you kind of should listen to before this one, we learned about Jimmy Holmes, a child growing up in a loving family. Somewhat shy, after moving at age 12, his social anxiety would worsen as he became increasingly isolated. Still, he excels academically, attending college, and then pursuing graduate school at the University of Colorado and Schutt's medical campus. He develops a core group of friends, Ben Garcia, Tim Tapscott, and Gargi Data, with whom he begins a romantic relationship, although she ultimately breaks up with James, not seeing a future in it. While James's graduate school grades were good, his lab work suffered. With increasingly intrusive, violent thoughts, he begins psychological counseling with the Director of Student Mental Health Services, Dr. Lynne Fenton. While he gave her the creeps, Dr. Fenton found no immediate threat to James or anyone else, but expressed concerns about his homicidal ideation. But her patient remained very guarded and uncommunicative about his feelings. She diagnosed him with schizotypal personality disorder, which involves eccentric behaviors, paranoia, and disconnects from reality. But then Dr. Fenton made a mistake in prescribing medication to James Hughes instead of Holmes, which the pharmacist caught. But Holmes was notified and was displeased. His email to Fenton read, quote, "An inconvenient Fenton, Holmes," end quote. And then some bizarre symbols and letters, which he found unsettling. At his next appointment on May 1st, James was quiet and sullen. Dr. Fenton mentioned the name error and asked what the symbols meant. He explained that the cues represented him punching her in the eye, saying, quote, "Violence. Is that what you needed to hear?" End quote. However, James now recalled the incident differently when he was talking with Dr. Reed, his court-appointed psychiatrist, after the shooting. He said he felt slighted by her misspelling his name, and that the emoticons depicted her figuratively punching him in the eye. Now, if I have to pick Dr. Fenton over James Holmes, I tend to believe Dr. Fenton's account. James also admitted to missing Gargi, but he had a new love interest, Hillary, that he was texting with. He continued his struggles with lab work, and Dr. Fenton decided to seek a second opinion and brought in psychiatrist Dr. Robert Feinstein, an expert in violence, who joined their sessions after James finally agreed. But unknown to anyone else, in between sessions, James secretly acquired several weapons, including a taser disguised as a cell phone and a Smith & Wesson folding knife. May 10th, 2012, he got 2 grenade-style canisters of tear gas and a gas mask. On May 22nd, he purchased a Glock Model 22, a reliable .40 caliber handgun that holds 15 rounds. And it became more lethal when loaded with hollow point cartridges, which Holmes also bought. He had begun focusing on the mission, his plan to kill as many people as he could. He believed that committing a homicide would somehow stop his depression, preventing him from committing suicide. Later, he would repeat this belief to a number of investigators, identifying his motive: kill to relieve his depression, and then there was this idea of human capital. I'll get more into that shortly. Aurora, Colorado, July 20th, 2012, just after midnight. Jennalise Long was stationed at Buckley Air Force Base in Colorado when she decided, on a whim, to join a group of military friends at the premiere of Batman. As gunfire erupted and screams filled the air, she managed to escape the theater, a decision that continues to haunt her due to survivor's guilt. Now married, Jennalise never feels quite safe and constantly feels the need to have a backup plan wherever she goes. On the 10th anniversary of the shooting, she told CBS News' Dominic Garcia that she's part of the group Pull Your Heart Out, a mentorship program using strength sports like lifting weights to prevent drug addiction and violence with at-risk youth and underserved populations. Long said, quote, "It helps release those endorphins enough to make me feel level. And if I'm really frustrated or I'm feeling triggered, it's the one thing that always gets me out of my head enough to function the rest of the day," end quote. Oh, so many lives impacted still. The truth was, James Holmes deceived counselor Margaret Roth and Dr. Lynne Fenton about his reasons for seeking psychiatric help, claiming it was anxiety and social phobia. Part of his mind wanted to be stopped from killing. However, a stronger part did not, and that part never surfaced in therapy. Holmes was far too controlled to let that happen. Now he faced the important graduate preliminary exams in late May, a huge life hurdle. And James chose not to study, instead focusing on his mission. He left it up to fate whether or not he would pass. At the same time, being inconsistent, he sought out his mentor, Dr. Achim Klug, in the Department of Physiology and Biophysics, asking him about joining his lab. After Klug raised some concerns about his past lab performance, James withdrew his proposition and approached Professor Kurt Fried in the Clinical Pharmacology and Toxicology Department, who responded much more optimistically. So James is continuing to be somewhat odd, but an interested grad student. May 28th, James bought a Remington 870, a 12-gauge tactical shotgun. Tactical. This word refers to its external design. This shotgun functions the same way as a pump-action shotgun, which is used for duck hunting. Now, the Remington holds 7 shells instead of the usual 3 to 5. 3 days later was his appointment with Dr. Fenton and Dr. Feinstein. When James arrived, the waiting room door was locked, which really wasn't unusual, but it was still a first for him. During the session, he noticed a bag behind Dr. Feinstein's chair, paranoia gripping him. Now he believed that Fenton had locked the door out of fear and that the bag contained a taser for her self-defense. While James Holmes made Dr. Fenton uneasy, the locked door and bag were innocuous, and he said nothing to either doctor about this. By this time, James was spending about 100 hours a week playing Diavolo 3 and ignoring his studies. At another session, Dr. Fenton cautiously probed as to whether James had been bullied, and he denied this. They did agree to consider antipsychotic medication and scheduled an appointment for June 11th. By now, both psychiatrists were concerned. Holmes's vague language made them wonder what he wasn't saying, raising their suspicions. But there wasn't enough evidence for action or involuntary commitment. There just wasn't. U.S. laws on involuntary hospitalization are strict, and they favor the patient, making it challenging to help severely mentally ill individuals who may not recognize their need for treatment. Now, today, mental health agencies can petition the court on behalf of patients to prove that they are seriously ill and in imminent danger. Dr. Reed writes, quote, "Had Dr. Fenton or Dr. Feinstein tried to commit Holmes to a psychiatric hospital based on what they had heard from him to that point, a judge would probably have stopped the process in its tracks," end quote. That is just the law. Now, James and Hillary kept texting into June. She invited him on a hike, but it never materialized. She found him friendly, though a bit odd, and was not interested in a relationship with him. He told her that he didn't want her to be the girlfriend of a murderer. And more purchases were made. He bought handcuffs, road spikes to puncture car tires, and first aid supplies online, keeping his purchases far below the radar. Preliminary oral exams came, and James was questioned for an hour by 3 professors casually in a small conference room. Although he started off well, he soon became unfocused and frustrated, later feeling he had answered poorly. When asked about his feelings, he texted friends that they really didn't matter, since he was focused on a mission that could end up with him dead or in prison. After this exam, James legally purchased his 3rd firearm, a Smith & Wesson MP-15 rifle, the civilian version of the AR-15. Commonly labeled an assault rifle, it actually uses the same ammunition as many hunting rifles. Holmes modified it with a low-light sight for close-quarter combat. And please note that assault rifle is not an official classification. Dr. Reed writes that this term is often used to elicit fear or aggressive connotation, and I share this not as a gun enthusiast, but to highlight how language can be manipulated, because for years I was absolutely unaware of this nuance, and I hope to clarify it for you too. Another term, semi-automatic. That means the firearm is not automatic. It's not partially automatic. It means it is not automatic. Full automatic weapons are only available to those with special licenses and are not commonly accessible. An automatic firearm fires once, each time the trigger is pulled, requiring the shooter to release and then press the trigger again to fire. Well, James signed the required paperwork, stating he was not a felon or a psychiatric inpatient and had no impairments affecting gun safety. These are true. The background check, conducted using his birth date, social security number, and driver's license, and returned no red flags. Later, when emailing his parents, he did not mention any of these gun purchases. Secrets, and a lot more secrets. On Monday afternoon, Dr. G.J. Aghavarian informed James that he had failed his preliminary exams, but he could retake the exam in a few weeks. Despite the doctor's confidence in his chances of passing, James declined to retake it, deciding to discontinue his graduate studies in the neuroscience program, effective immediately. When Hillary texted to ask if he had passed, he replied no, which she assumed was a joke. He mentioned quitting again, and when she asked if he was serious, he said, quote, "I'm being James. I'm quitting. Best of luck to you," end quote. And then he continued with the withdrawal process. But he kept his appointment with Drs. Fenton and Feinstein, saying nothing about these developments. Aurora, Colorado, July 20th, 2012, just after midnight. Outdoorsman Gordon Cowden had been eager to see the new movie with his 2 children, 17-year-old Brooke and 16-year-old Sierra. In row 13, Brooke heard firecrackers, thinking it was some Dark Knight Rises stunt, and then realized it was gunfire. Gordon Cowden got up to remove them away from the danger, speaking his last words, quote, "I love you both," end quote, just before he was fatally shot. Remembered for his strong faith and sense of humor, Gordon, at age 51, was the oldest victim that night when the world lost the kind, quick-witted Texan. Another appointment with Dr. Fenton and Dr. Feinstein. James sounded logical and undisturbed by dropping out. At the same time, his paranoia was growing. A few weeks back, Dr. Feinstein had worn a sling after he had injured himself, and James suspected it might be a fake, possibly to test his level of empathy, or maybe it was a hiding place for a weapon. He felt misunderstood and believed his doctors were afraid of him, though he had given them no reason to be fearful. He later would tell Dr. Reed that he thought Fenton and Feinstein were afraid because he had bought the weapons. But again, this is illogical. He had not told them he bought the weapons. That is why I say there is a part of him that hoped they knew, that hoped they would stop him, though he was suppressing that part. Both therapists encouraged James to continue treatment after withdrawing, offering to continue therapy over the summer at little to no cost to him. Again, James declined. They requested permission to talk to his parents, friends, and the school about him, unsure if his comments were true or false. Again, he refused them this. About halfway through the session, James stood up, claimed he needed to go meet with his advisor, and abruptly left without saying goodbye. Fenton considered reversing her diagnosis to schizophreniform disorder, which is characterized by psychotic episodes and breaks with reality, which is actually identical to acute schizophrenia, which becomes the official diagnosis after a patient has had the symptoms for 6 months. The doctors documented this final sessions with James Holmes, expressing their ongoing concerns, which had been there from the beginning, noting that Dr. Fenton's decision to bring Dr. Feinstein in for consultation was highly appropriate. Their notations: long-standing fantasies of killing as many people as possible, caginess in discussing any details regarding methods, targets, and timing, refused to grant permission to contact anyone who could give collateral information, unclear timeline of his mental health status and past history. Now Dr. Fenton overrode the usual doctor-patient confidentiality protocols and activated the CU Denver Beta, the threat assessment team, which investigates significant dangers to others. She also contacted 2 of James' senior professors that day. Neither reported any knowledge of threats, although they did note his awkward social behavior and particular comments, confirming to Fenton that others found James to be anxious and disinterested in his lab work. Beta would confirm that James had no criminal record and had no weapon permits. No one was aware that he had purchased 3 firearms, ammunition, and tear gas grenades over the last 3 weeks. Dr. Fenton also called James's mother, Lynne Holmes, in San Diego. She asked if James had ever been violent, deliberately not mentioning his murderous fantasies. And Lynne confirmed he had no history of violence. She did express concern, mentioning that she was not surprised because James had always been considered odd around other people, especially after they moved from Oak Hills to San Diego. Quote, "She had worried about him every day of her life," end quote. But Dr. Fenton did learn something new. James had been furious with his mother a few months after graduating from UC Riverside. He was very angry when she threatened to evict him if he didn't find a job. Taking in this new information, Fenton noted that he was, quote, "intermittently functioning at a psychotic level, possibly shifting into a frank psychotic disorder, such as schizophrenia, though it wasn't the rapid worsening type typical of most psychotic breaks," end quote. Again, did she have enough to hospitalize James Holmes against his will? No, he absolutely did not meet the current criteria for involuntary hospitalization. He wasn't gravely disabled. He showed no suicidal thoughts. While he had long-standing homicidal ideation, he denied specific targets and displayed no anger towards others. Even when he made hostile remarks, there were no threats or violence in his past. And you cannot just put someone away in the United States of America. Protecting individuals from unjust confinement is a crucial civil right in the U.S. Any limiting of that right requires strong evidence meeting strict legal standards. If she had gone to a judge, he'd have tossed this out of court. The assessments made by Dr. Fenton and Dr. Feinstein were reasonable based on the available information. This woman did everything she could do psychologically, medically, and legally. And yet, she is among the group of people whose lives would be ruined by the events that would shortly unfold. Aurora, Colorado, July 20th, 2012, just after midnight. Alexander Jonathan Bach, called AJ, was an 18-year-old Gateway High School graduate and the class clown, known for his quick wit. A talented artist and musician, AJ planned to attend Rocky Mountain College of Art and Design that fall to pursue a career as an art teacher. That night, AJ and his 19-year-old fiancée, La Samoa Cross, attended the premiere. La Samoa said, quote, "When AJ and I realized that something very bad was happening, he grabbed my hand ready to leave and looked at me in the most shocked way and then hit the ground." End quote. In the ensuing panic, AJ and La Samosa became separated, with her searching frantically for him for 18 hours. Finally, Officer Cody Lanier would notify her that AJ had been killed. Quote, "My world, my whole identity was shook," end quote, she recalled. In the years that followed, La Samosa struggled to rebuild her life and her purpose. Eventually, she reached out to Officer Cody Lanier, realizing that he was there that day and he understood her trauma. After meeting for lunch, they developed a healing friendship that blossomed into romance, and they were married in 2021, surrounded by loved ones. Since before the preliminary exams, James had isolated himself from his friends, despite Ben's attempts to reach out. Illogically, James felt abandoned, partially because Gargi didn't want to see him. Although he admitted to ignoring his friends and deleting their phone numbers, he felt sad to see them go, not wanting them associated with a killer, while he still felt abandoned by them. In early June, James Holmes began writing and drawing what became known as his notebook. This personal journal recorded his activities and were messages for future readers, particularly Dr. Fenton. It provides a valuable first-hand account of his thoughts and behaviors in the weeks before the shooting, serving as a distorted window into his mind. The spiral-bound notebook titled, quote, "James Holmes, The Course of a Life," end quote, has 30 pages. Entirely handwritten and arranged chronologically from early June to just before the shooting, the title page features a circular logo with the number 1 in the center and an infinity symbol extending horizontally across it side to side. This unique symbol, created by Holmes, is known as Ultraception, and I have a picture of it on my blog. The following page included a dedication to his family using their nicknames: Goober for his mom, Chrissy for his little sister, and Bobo for Dad. Holmes claims that he wrote the notebook for Dr. Fenton, and he mailed it to her on July 19th, just hours before the shooting. He wanted the notebook to, quote, "educate the psychiatrist Fenton so something like this wouldn't happen again," end quote. If he died in the theater, it would be his story. Now, parts of it are consistent with this purpose, while others are disjointed and confused. It still provided a detailed planning of the steps taken for his mission that would lead to killing as many people as he could. Now, since he is certainly not articulate, this notebook grants us a clearer insight. Now, the concept of human capital that I have mentioned, it was detailed in the notebook section titled Insights into the Mind of Madness. Quote, All men are uncreated equal, end quote. Using stick figures, each person has a value of 1, and that goes to 0 when someone is deceased. Throughout this, he has pseudo-equations and infinity signs that hold no actual meaning. Speaking with Holmes in 2014, Dr. Reed learned he still believed in this human capital theory. One can absorb another person's value of 1 by deliberately killing him. This added numerical human capital, but does not grant some advantage. It's just a score, like a notch on one's life belt. And Holmes had certain rules associated with human capital. 1, the killing must be intentional. 2, accidents do not count. And 3, if more than one person does the killing, only one gets the macabre credit. Now, I do wonder if this ties some weird way into his love of video games, because this would be one horrific game, right? And I'm not blaming video games. Video games are fun, but he is mentally ill. Now, importantly, Dr. Reed also warns that attempting to interpret every squiggle on every page of the notebook, it's a fool's quest. Much of the notebook is confusing. It's a disconnected flow of expressions from a given moment, detached from reality. I mean, was he joking? Was he communicating to Dr. Fenton in his head, contemplating his mission, thinking about pizza? I mean, we have no idea. But what these pages do suggest is that he is functioning adequately during the 6 weeks prior to the shooting, because some sections appear rational, especially his planning. So, what I gleaned from reading his notebook, he writes that he had tried several ways of coping with this human capacity theorem and his life that he was constructing while trying to balance out these nonsensical equations. Quote, when mankind can't find truth, untruth is converted to truth via violence. But violence is a false response to truth while giving the illusion of truth. This is widely understood with murder being unjust. However, mankind hasn't found a better alternative. There is still mass violence and war, end quote. Now, what the heck does that mean? As I said, squiggles and not really making a whole lot of sense here. Well, he writes of the steps that he has taken to cope with his mental illness filtering in. Okay, 1, ignore the problem. If it doesn't exist, then the solution is irrelevant. Then he writes, this didn't work. He tried to escape his tormented mind through reading, television, and alcohol. Now, this caught my attention. He was never seen drunk by anyone, and yet 50 bottles of alcohol would later be recovered from his apartment after the shooting. I believe he spent a great deal of time drinking while playing video games. I think when he was alone, he tried to drink his tormenting thoughts into silence, and it didn't work. I think this was a crutch that he used far more than he let on. 2, delay the problem. Live in the moment without worrying about solving the problem. He notes, didn't work. He sought information and hoped it would increase his knowledge, thus improving his cognitive function. Outwardly, others saw him studying, working hard, committed to neuroscience, and doing well, although the psychosis was always there. 3, he tried to pawn the problem. If one can't answer the question, get someone else to answer them. Guess what? It didn't work. No one else knew the answers either. This made me think back to James discussing human capacity and killing people with Gargi. She thought he was talking about fantasy, but what he heard was her not providing the answers he sought. Recognize now, there are no answers because this is a delusion, and it's not real, and he's psychotic. He's broken with reality. He also wrote, quote, self-diagnosis for the broken mind, end quote, listing the disorders he thought he had. general anxiety disorder, autism, ADHD, schizophrenia, body dysmorphic disorder, borderline personality disorder, narcissism, anxiety, avoidant personality disorder, obsessive compulsive disorders, psychosis, this hair pulling, restless leg syndrome. Well, some of these might be valid, but certainly not all of them. And he notes his self-identified symptoms and the ages at which they began. Now, of these 30 pages in his notebook, 5 have nothing written on them but why, repeated over and over in increasingly larger and larger writing, until the last page where the word why covers like 25% of the page. James knows his mind is broken, and he's not wrong. His mission planning is outlined. He had considered a number of scenarios and his specific reasons for rejecting them, settling on a mass kill spree in a theater or an airline, which was ultimately rejected because it has too much security and he wasn't a terrorist. He rambles about his psychiatrists, anxiety, and medication. On anti-anxiety medication, he says his fears ebbed and that this was terrible. His fear of failure was a driving force in his seeking success. Without it, success was jettisoned, and there was no fear of the consequence of failure, which left his hate unchecked. Highly dangerous situation. Weapons acquired, Holmes now writes that his wild card will be homemade explosives. And then there's this random thought, quote, faith. What kind of God commands his people not to murder, yet cowers behind free will, end quote. And these are the important takeaways from the notebook that I identified. Sometimes he seems rational and he's planning with care and consideration, optimizing his options, and the next makes absolutely no sense. June 13th, Holmes spent $1,200 on ammunition and 10 extra 30-round magazines for his MP-15 rifle, a high-capacity drum magazine holding 100 rounds, and a green dot laser sighting system mounted under the barrel for targeting. The handgun ammo he chose were hollow points designed to ensure the most carnage. Rifle cartridges had full metal jacket bullets, which have a higher muzzle velocity and a greater ability to penetrate shielding, such as theater seats. A week later, he bought 10 magazines for his Glock and an advanced combat ballistic helmet. He cased the theater, taking cell phone pictures of the interior. On July 1st, he appears on CC Video at Gander Mountain Sporting Goods, sporting newly dyed vivid orange hair, and purchased a Vortex Strike-Fire red dot rifle designed for close quarters and low-light combat. And then he went grocery shopping. Another purchase included an urban assault vest, bullet-resistant pants, and a groin protector. Purchasing incendiary materials was more difficult, and he really didn't know anything about creating bombs or napalm. But he would acquire a variety of chemicals and materials to create a homemade napalm and thermite. July 4th, Arlene and Bob called their son, worried about him, knowing that he had dropped out. After Dr. Fenton's call, they had sent him the money left over in his college fund, about $5,000. Bob pressed him to go to counseling, not giving away that Dr. Fenton had contacted them. They assured him that they loved him and would support him. The next day, his unemployment benefits were denied. So in there, he's applying for unemployment benefits. Now his time was divided between mission prep, playing video games, and looking for casual sex on varying dating apps. He wondered about how others would perceive him after the shooting, looking into submitting material to the Denver Post and New York Times, but never sending anything. Now he took selfies, wearing possession eyes, which blacked out his eyes, giving him a demonic look. Later asked how he viewed himself in these photos, he replied, quote, was a tough guy, the kind of person that doesn't get messed with, end quote. He badly desires being seen as competent and strong and not broken, and he wanted to be remembered that way. All false imagery. James Holmes was not confident. He was not assertive. He didn't stand up for himself. He shrank from conflict, except in his fantasy life, winning at video games, which is really not anything but a false achievement. He is a pretender. Looking at photos of himself all armored up, he saw himself as a man of action. He views his actions as real. Those tough TV guys, that's an actor, pretending. More planning commenced. Quote, the cruel twists of fate are unkind to the misfortunate, end quote. He had written in his notebook, referring to his targeting being random. Again, he visits Century 16, taking careful notes and photographing it. He diagrams the theater building layout and various auditoriums, noting the best side to approach, too many exits, ultimately ranking them by preference. He plots exit paths, weighing the pros and cons. He calculated the Aurora PD response time, and he picked a movie that would ensure maximum casualties, The Dark Knight Rises, at midnight, so there would be few children there. Much of this reveals his internal dialogue, believing that shooting people would alleviate his depression and stop him from committing suicide, and would increase his worth by taking their human capital. With all this cautious planning, he barely goes target shooting to practice, demonstrating that his reality was truly anchorless. And this is a good thing, mind you. I'm glad he didn't go do a lot of practice shooting. His mind now fixates even more, if that's possible, on the mission, obsessing, creating an unstoppable drive towards its fulfillment. July 8th, 2012. His friend Hillary texted, asking if he was back in California. Saying he was in the same apartment, they bantered back and forth. Inviting him to go on a hike, he declined, texting her, quote, it's in your best interest to avoid me. I'm bad news bears. Floodgates open now, end quote. And he set the date, July 19th, drawing his Ultraception symbol on his calendar. He repeatedly bought Century 16 theater tickets, hoping for a seat in the right theater, Auditorium 9, and failed. July 13th, he wrote in his notebook, quote, embrace the hate, a dark night rises, end quote. He also copied the Denver Hospital mental health hotline number into his iPhone. It came time to use the chemicals he had managed to purchase to concoct improvised explosives and booby traps, working on this from July 16th to the 19th. Complicated makeshift bombs were designed to turn his apartment into a hellscape. Packing 6 black plastic spheres with gunpowder, he put gasoline in others. He poured homemade napalm into large glass jars, which held dozens of firearm cartridges, intending for them to explode in the intense heat after the explosions. Leftover gasoline was put in his microwave. He spread air fresheners all over so the neighbors wouldn't smell the fumes. Wires connected all of this to detonating devices, including tripwires set up at the apartment door. But this is really not his forte, no matter how intelligent he was. And after the shooting, experts disagreed on whether or not the materials might have ignited or if gasoline exploded or whatever. But regardless, they knew this apartment was extremely dangerous. And then he mailed his notebook to Dr. Fenton to show her the reason why he cut off therapy with her. Now later he would claim it was due to him losing his insurance when he dropped out. If she had just kept seeing him, this wouldn't have happened. But you recall that both she and Dr. Feinstein offered to continue seeing him through the summer, and he declined. He believed they should have read his mind, which is nonsense. Now he prepared by organizing his weapons and gear, including 11 magazines of ammunition, a shotgun shell belt, bullet-resistant pants, Kevlar helmet, gas mask, and tactical vest. Around 11 p.m., he took a prescription painkiller just in case he was wounded. And before leaving, he soaked his carpet with gasoline and oil, setting the tripwire that would unleash a nightmare if his front door were opened. As he left the apartment, he set a CD to play loudly after 25 minutes of silence, hoping a neighbor would call in a noise complaint, triggering Armageddon. He also placed a boombox, a remote-controlled toy tank, and a remote controller next to the dumpster in the parking lot. He thought the music from the boombox would draw attention, and he anticipated that someone would try to operate the toy using the remote. However, this remote was connected to a detonator in his apartment, and this explosion would divert the police away from the Century 16 location and likely kill sleeping residents. July 20th, Giovanni Padella heard music from the dumpster in the parking lot on Paris Street and found a boombox, toy car, and the remote control. He took the boombox and left the other items behind. At 12:10 a.m., a neighbor called the police about the loud noise, but the noise complaint was marked as low priority. Before it could be addressed, the theater attack occurred and the shooter's apartment was identified as being booby-trapped. Here we go. At Century 16 Theater, Holmes parked his car by the rear exit near Auditorium 9. Dressed casually, with his orange hair hidden under a dark knit cap, he blended in with the crowd, waiting for the midnight premiere of The Dark Knight Rises. After obtaining a ticket, he quietly entered Auditorium 9. During the previews, he pretended to receive a call on his cell phone to avoid drawing attention to himself as he walked out the back exit. Propping open the door, he returned to his car and put on his body armor and earbuds. His car's tainted windows helped conceal his actions. He remained calm as he heard a theater employee outside throwing out the trash, prepared for what might come next. But the employee just went back in. Dressed, Holmes pulled out his cell phone and called the CU Hospital mental health hotline for one last chance to reconsider. The part of his mind that wanted to stop was active at this point, but he heard nothing on the line. A hotline operator later confirmed that she answered the call from Holmes's cell phone, but she'd heard nothing on the other end. When Dr. Reed later asked what he would have done if he'd heard someone answer, Holmes said he would have explained the situation, but ultimately he felt he would have continued. It was only when he pressed end call did he realize it was actually going to happen. Until then, he had felt skeptical. As he stepped out of the car, he dropped a tear gas canister, with it rolling away. Leaving it, he went toward the propped open exit door. He fantasized about being stopped by the FBI. Paranoid, whenever he'd seen a police car or had gotten a ticket for speeding, he wondered if he was under surveillance. But nothing happened. Now he turned up the techno music on his iPod and entered the theater. Few noticed the bulky figure who tossed the tear gas canister, releasing sparks and smoke. He wasn't exhilarated or scared. He was simply completing his mission. Many thought it was a stunt, but that quickly turned into shock, fear, and chaos as the struggle for survival began. In 2017, survivor Stephen Moten spoke to Newsweek, saying that he and his brother Lamar were excited to be at the theater until he, quote, saw a gas canister arc high across the screen and then over the crowded theater, end quote. With bullets flying, one ricocheted off a chair, hitting his collarbone, quote, breaking off inside my body and into my spinal cord, end quote. Stefan was paralyzed from the neck down, and he would spend months in the hospital having surgery after surgery. As of 2020, he can move his arms a little bit. Quote, I can open the door, I can almost feed myself. I have some upper body, but not all of the way function, end quote. With the 12 gauge, Holmes fired with people hunkering down, crawling, desperate to find a safe place. But there was no safe place. In the back left area, people were frantic to leave, so he shot in that direction. Gun empty, he dropped it. Marcus Weaver and his friend, 32-year-old Rebecca Wingo, had spent the hot summer day swimming. Marcus loved Batman, while Rebecca had never seen a Batman movie before. Meeting up at the theater, they took their seats. Quote, about 10 minutes into the movie, you could see someone walk through the door and a smoke bomb goes off. He leaned over Rebecca and said, I think someone is ruining the movie. They're lighting a smoke bomb. Then all of a sudden, you just hear this boom, 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 and you see this person firing in a mask. And I instinctively just got down and got Rebecca down as well. I kept hearing the screaming and the bullets hitting the front of seats, end quote. Crouching, Weaver heard an omnipotent voice telling him that the shooting would stop and that would be his chance to escape. And 5 seconds later, it stopped. Amidst the yelling, Weaver, quote, got up, got Rebecca up, and tried to go down the row. People were trying to get out, and then all of a sudden, gunshots again, end quote. Falling through the row, he managed to crawl out the left side of the theater. Shot 5 times, Rebecca had fallen backwards into the chair, and then he lost her in the chaos. A Chinese interpreter for the Air Force, veteran Rebecca Wingo, had 2 daughters, ages 9 and 5, when she was killed that night. Explaining that their mother had died was difficult for Robert Wingo, who'd maintained a friendly relationship with his ex-wife, saying, quote, she was the show. She often gave away her last dollar. She would do anything for anybody, end quote. 13 years later, Robert sees Rebecca in their daughters. Quote, they are confident, precocious, engaging little women, and a lot of that is because of what Rebecca poured into them, end quote. Holmes would claim that he fired randomly, which was false. He specifically went after those trying to get out, quote, because I can't have everybody running away from the scene, because then I'm kind of out of control of the situation, end quote. Wanting to keep them in the theater, he kept the crowd disoriented with the tear gas. He remembers shooting from the front corner and then towards the right, but victims speak of him walking up the aisle. Down, hiding behind seats, he shot them, through the back of the seats. They were no match for the full metal jacket bullets, just as he planned. The only escape aisle was on the left, far from him, so that they couldn't attack him and stop him. Later, he wasn't sure he heard shots, but he knew the movie kept playing. He felt no heat, no cold, no sweating, no tension. Emotion was absent. Then the gun jammed. Many fled the theater, annoying Holmes, as he had so much ammo left to use. He tried to clear the jam, and the truth was he wasn't all that familiar with the weapon. After a minute or two, he gave up and decided just to leave. He headed down towards the screen, and he looked back into the stands. The seats were empty, save for a few still cowering. Holmes thought he'd hit perhaps 20 people, maybe killing 3, if anyone. In his mind, he'd shot the rifle 15 times, and then the handguns. But he was wrong. 70 were wounded, 12 dead, many shot multiple times. However, the only ones that counted towards his mission were those 12 people he killed, and an unborn baby. The rest were just collateral damage. Dr. Reed later asked if the collateral damage mattered at all. Quote, well, people were maimed and wounded and injured. It's not good that they had to be injured for me to kill the other people. And 12. 12 people dead, 58 wounded, many severely and permanently disabled. The 400 people there that night would never forget Holmes. Exiting the way he came in, Holmes dropped the rifle, and the concrete was slippery with blood, and Holmes would leave footprints in it heading to his car. A 911 call came into Aurora's police department dispatch at 12:38 a.m. Kevin Quinones was shouting over the gunshots in the background, quote, "There's some guy after us," end quote. 41 911 calls followed. Detective Randy Hansen would testify that he counted 30 shots in Quinones' 27-second call. By the time the first police unit arrived, in less than 2 minutes, the shooting was over. Police officers saw moviegoers running out the exits, many covered with blood, screaming. Securing the scene and helping victims were the priorities. Officer Jason Sweeney and Jason Oviatt walked towards the guy in SWAT gear. Holmes considered shooting them. Oviatt drew a handgun as Sweeney shouted, quote, "Show us your hands," end quote. Complying, Holmes got down on the ground as ordered. Searched, the officers found a folding knife and put the suspect in the police vehicle. He now told them that he'd acted alone and that he had explosives at his apartment. That statement triggered what was essentially a second event, the investigation and ultimately the disarming of the improvised explosive devices. After stripping off his body armor, Holmes was unnaturally calm, now in his t-shirt and underwear. He smelled awful, dripping sweat. Skinny, dyed red hair, his pupils were huge. And Officer Sheldon Irons took Holmes to Aurora's major crime unit. Outside in front of the theater was chaos. The parking lot was filled with cars, a glut of frantic, hysterical people running for their lives, and the ambulances could not get to the main doors. Getting to the rear of the theater, where many of the most seriously wounded had been carried, was also difficult, and against police policy, officers put the grievously wounded in their patrol cars, transporting them to ambulances and to the hospital, saving lives. Blood would slosh back and forth on the floorboards of their cars. Notified, emergency rooms prepared for severe casualties, readying for emergency surgeries. Survivor Marcus Weaver said, quote, "They were just dragging people out, kids that were just bloody, a sea of ambulances, first responders, and the whole time the gunman was on the other side of the theater being arrested. A little girl comes up to me and says, 'Your arm is bleeding.' And I was like, 'What are you talking about?' And sure enough, my arm was bleeding and it was gushing all over," end quote. Paramedics had to persuade Marcus to get into the ambulance. He was reluctant to leave his friend, Rebecca Wingo, and later he would learn that she had been killed. Another woman was 25-year-old Ashley Moser, who was shot in the face and chest and was unresponsive. A man with a head wound tried to jump from a patrol car to find his daughter, which made Officer Justin Grizzle flinch. Grizzle suspected that the fallen child he had seen moments before aiding the man and the woman was their 6-year-old daughter. Veronica Moser Sullivan was a vibrant little girl when she was wounded in the neck and stomach, dying on the operating table. Just completing kindergarten, she loved Disney princesses and was excited to have started swimming lessons just that week. Her mother, Ashley, was pregnant at the time of the shooting. After multiple surgeries, Ashley was left a paraplegic, and sadly, her unborn child, baby girl Towles Moser, did not survive. Ashley had said she was looking forward to being the mother of 2, but now she's nobody's mommy, and to this day, she needs constant nursing care. Caleb Medley and his 9-month pregnant wife, Katie, attended the film with their friend, Ashley Kurtz, Concerned about possibly going into labor, they had taken seats down the front of the auditorium. When the gunman opened fire, Katie crouched beside Ashley, realizing Caleb had been shot in the head. As police officers arrived, Katie left to protect their unborn baby, saying, quote, "If Caleb dies, that's going to be the last piece of him that I have," end quote. 2 days after the shooting, Kaylee gave birth to Hugo Medley, while Caleb underwent his third surgery. Caleb would survive, but now uses a wheelchair and has very limited speech. John Blunk was, quote, "one of the kind of guys that walks into the shop every day with a big smile on his face and brightens the atmosphere," end quote. He was attending the midnight showing with his girlfriend, Jansen Young. When the shooting started, Blunk pushed Jansen to the ground and covered her with his body as bullets hit his head, both lungs, groaning as he died. Air Force reservist Jesse Childress, Munnerith Gravely, Navy serviceman John Larimar, and his girlfriend Julia Vostyak went to Century 16 that night with colleagues from Buckley's Air Force Base. John Larimar, excited to see Batman, bought a Batman t-shirt, mask, and a cape to wear that night. When the attack began, Jessie shielded Gravely, saving her life, save for a few cuts to her hand, but Jesse would lose his own life. He is remembered as an eager to be helpful and fun-loving man. Like Jesse, John Larriman also protected Julia by covering her with his body. Julia would write, quote, "When the violence occurred, John immediately and instinctively covered me and brought me to the ground in order to protect me from any danger. Moments later, John knowingly shielded me from a spray of gunshots. It was then, I believe, John was hit with a bullet that would possibly have struck me. I feel very strongly that I was saved by John and his ultimate kindness. Whether serving his country or protecting those close to him, John will be remembered for his bravery, quick thinking, and instincts. He will be remembered as a hero," end quote. Officers Aaron Blue and Everett Williams rushed the gravely wounded Jessica Grahi into the police car, with Blue noting, quote, "Every time she moved, she stopped breathing," end quote. And Jessica would not make it. Jessica was witty, vibrant, full of life, and had aspired to be a sports reporter. Her boyfriend, Jay Meloff, often said he dreaded sleeping because it meant time apart from her. Ironically, just weeks earlier, on June 5, 2012, Jessica had narrowly escaped a mass shooting at Toronto's Eaton Centre. After that, Jessica wrote, quote, "I was shown how fragile life was. I saw the terror on bystanders' faces. I saw the victims of a senseless crime. I saw lives change. We don't always know when or where our time on earth will end, when or where we will breathe our last breath. I say all the time that every moment we have to live our lives is a blessing. Every hug from a family member, every laugh we share with friends, even the times of solitude are all blessings. Every second of every day is a gift," end quote. And Jessica had so few weeks to cherish this precious insight. At the police station, detectives Chuck Mell and Craig Appeal arrived, joining Holmes in an interrogation room. Appeal offered Holmes a drink, which he accepted. When asked how to spell Holmes, he replied, "Like Sherlock." He answered their questions reasonably, confirming that he was willing to talk to them when asked about this multiple times. Noticing a sign for crimes against children, Holmes asked, quote, "There weren't any children hurt, were there?" End quote. The next day he would learn that a 6-year-old girl had died. He expressed his remorse to Dr. Reed. Quote, "I tried to minimize child fatalities by choosing midnight and a PG-13 movie." End quote. I do actually believe that. Holmes's planning was so deep and considered. In these first 2 hours after the shooting, this would be the best time to get a first-hand look into Holmes's mental condition. Although listless, he showed no anxiety or worries. After being read his Miranda rights, Holmes requested a court-appointed attorney halting the interrogation. With the video camera recording, he was booked and processed, with his DNA swabbed and paper bags placed over his hands to preserve gunshot residue, which he played with like hand puppets. Now in an orange jumpsuit, he was transferred to an isolated room in the medical unit of the Arapahoe County Detention Facility. The room was comfortable but basic, a stainless steel sink and toilet, and a small, high window. The fluorescent lights could be turned on and off, but the video camera was on 24/7, and he would remain there throughout his pretrial incarceration. The investigation began immediately and quickly became complex, focusing on the theater, the suspect's apartment, his texts, Amazon purchases, and cell phone records. Video footage from the theater shows a cap, concession cups, food wrappers, and then a body, a young man in a Batman t-shirt, barefoot. More bodies appear amidst the popcorn, blood, and shell casings. After the scene was cleared, dowels were inserted into bullet holes in the seats, creating, quote, a horizontal forest of thin sticks, end quote. Each one symbolized a bullet, the path of terror and destruction that led to death and destruction. At his Paris Street apartment, the Adams County Sheriff Department Hazard Devices Unit, consisting of dozens of Aurora SWAT officers, firefighters, and included FBI bomb technicians, evacuated the building and surrounding structures. Bomb-sniffing dogs cleared the parking lot as heavily armored personnel were deployed to secure the perimeter. Police snipers were deployed to ensure the safety of everyone. A camera suspended on a pole confirmed that it was safe to break the apartment window as the, quote, slow clear operation began, end quote. At 4:45 a.m., the phone rang at Arlene and Bob Holmes' house. ABC News was calling and asked if she was the mother of James Holmes. Arlene said she was, and they told her they wanted her to comment about the shooting. Wait, what shooting? Quote, and that was how I found out. It was surreal, end quote. In a 2017 BBC interview, Arlene shared, quote, the death threats started immediately. People left things in our mailbox. We had 50 reporters up and down the street and a helicopter flying around the backyard trying to shoot through the windows with a zoom lens. And all that when you're trying to make sense of this news about what your son had done. How do you do that? Not in your broadest, wildest dreams would you think that your son would shoot strangers. I am so sorry that this happened, end quote. All right, and to the folks who do this, that they harass the perpetrators' families, all right, that's wrong. It does not help one little bit. It scores one more evil against goodness. So knock it off and get some therapy for yourself, because this is really sick and I don't get it. In 2018, Bob and Arlene Holmes reached out to the community, speaking on mental health and doing an interview with Rocky Mountain PBS. They identified themselves as, quote, the parents of a mass murderer, end quote, and they began trying to educate mental health professionals and families so they can identify the warning signs that the Holmeses missed. Arlene told reporter John Ferrugia, quote, if you start to notice that he's pulling back, staying alone much more, not talking very much, these are signs of mental illness. We learned that this gradual decline in interaction and talking and speech were hallmarks of this disease, this mental illness, end quote. Bob, himself an introvert, said when he saw this in his son, he wasn't concerned. Now he knows better. A month before the Aurora theater shooting, they weren't concerned when Dr. Fenton called, saying she was treating James for social anxiety. He was getting help. They knew he wasn't comfortable around most people. And at this time, Arlene was reassured. He was getting treatment, and this was good. But restricted by HIPAA and other laws, Dr. Fenton could not say more about their adult child. And Bob and Arlene were both upset that they, quote, didn't tell us what we needed to know. Who can say 100% that we could have prevented it? But we sure as hell would have tried, end quote. Fortunately, in 2016, federal law was updated to permit compassionate communication, enabling families to be notified of information that could prove crucial in getting help for their loved ones. A change in the law that Arlene Holmes supported wholeheartedly. Continuing education for healthcare providers is also essential so they do not fear violating HIPAA and trampling on civil rights. School teachers, counselors, administrators also need training to identify mental illness in their students earlier. Quote, they may see things that their parents do not because that's when a kid is around a lot of other people, end quote, said Arlene. Both Arlene and Bob blame themselves for what happened in Aurora. They know that the victims live every day with what their son did. They should have known more about mental illness and recognize that this has to begin within the family. Quote, we are his parents. It is our fault for not being educated. If you're going to have a baby, you need to understand mental health, and you need to start looking for things and making sure that your kid has no mental health issues. That's the message, end quote. July 20th, 2012, Paris apartment, 6:30 a.m. A robot carefully unlocked the door and entered, its light revealing zigzag lines of white powder on the carpet. A fish line tripwire connected to an open jug ready to pour a chemical into a skillet that, if mixed, would create a violent fire in the room with gasoline fumes and flammable items. Bomb detonators were employed. Gallon-sized jars filled with gasoline, homemade napalm, and rifle cartridges were wired together alongside the black plastic spheres filled with gunpowder and homemade thermite. Motor oil had been poured onto the carpet, creating a quick fuse connecting the incendiary devices. This was no means constructed by a master bomb maker, but remained very dangerous. At one point, FBI Special Agent Garrett Gumbiner warned Holmes that an explosion in his apartment could injure children, which led Holmes to cooperate, providing information about dismantling his devices. He sounded fairly normal during these interrogations, but later defense psychiatrists would label him as psychotic and almost autistic, contradicting the recorded interview. The phone woke up another woman that morning, Dr. Lynne Fenton. It was Robert Feinstein calling. Quote, it's our guy, Lynn. He did it. He really did it. Jesus, I can't believe it. End quote. Lynne Fenton describes this moment. Lightheaded, her heart was racing, blood pounding in her ears, and she scanned the news reports that were everywhere. She couldn't breathe. With CU Denver setting up a command center, numb, Fenton gathered herself together and went in to help. Quote, this is my Virginia Tech, end quote. Of course, the police had questions, and she told them he never said a word. He barely talked. As she thought, quote, I didn't stop him, end quote, was replayed over and over and over in her mind. She was falling off a cliff. Was this her fault? Could she have done anything differently? It was endless as she shifted to autopilot. Finally, by 3:30 p.m., bomb technicians had rendered all the hazardous devices safe and cleared of suspicious items. An independent investigation concluded in 2014 that, quote, the bomb squad and other agencies' unified approach to the Paris Street incident was exemplary. Their response prevented significant damage to the building and avoided injuries to response personnel and residents, end quote. Holmes's court-appointed attorney arrived, learning that her client had mailed a notebook to Dr. Fenton. Quickly, trucks rolled up to the U.S. Postal Office, sorting through 15 to 20 bins of mail for a potentially dangerous package. Once found, the bin was isolated, and the bomb disposal robot retrieved the package for inspection in a portable X-ray machine, which indicated it was harmless. Days later, a traumatized Lynne Fenton was struggling, and the university was preparing for litigation. Reviewing her sessions with Holmes, they questioned her repeatedly. And then on January 27, 2012, she was outed. Reporters flooded the CU Denver Psychiatric Department, calling her name. Dr. Lynne Fenton was splashed across the newspapers, the terrible psychiatrist who had let him do this. Quote, the public's anger at this senseless massacre would now be directed at me, end quote. The scapegoat had been found. Unable to see patients or return home, with her Facebook hacked and threatening phone calls screaming, fucking murderer, she couldn't believe what was happening. Thousands of emails clogged her inbox, death threats, crazy messages, and endless media requests. But she couldn't respond to any of it due to a gag order and HIPAA laws. Rumors were now circulating on social media and in the press that Holmes identified with the Joker due to his orange hair, which was total nonsense, by the way. Dr. Reed would ask Holmes why he requested a lawyer, since he believed he would either go to prison or be killed by police. He explained that he wanted to avoid incriminating himself, and he disliked talking, which they would make him do. Yeah, I believe that part of it. Isolated from other inmates, Holmes was allowed 1 hour of outdoor exercise or TV time each day, typically opting for the latter. His routine involved sleeping, eating, and reading, with occasional purchases of Doritos from the commissary. He knew Wednesdays meant fresh clothes, and Fridays were commissary days. The rest of the time was a blur. In isolation, I believe he relished this. Eventually, he would hang a few family photos on his walls and started receiving letters from fans, empty people who seek purpose. Some letters were often suggestive and highly disjointed, featuring attractive women, though their authenticity makes one wonder. They expressed support, affection, deep and abiding love, but he chose not to respond, despite believing that they genuinely liked him. This is a paraphilia, hybristophilia, a sexual interest in and attraction to those who commit crimes. And in some cases, this may be directed towards people in prison. It is not healthy. Of this, Dr. Reed writes, quote, in actuality, the often lurid-sounding letters betrayed a sad emptiness between their grotesque passion. They hoped Holmes would fill the space, or maybe they fill it for themselves for a little while by simply writing without any real contact or intimacy. End quote. Some wrote, telling him to get right with God. Others swore he was innocent, framed in some conspiracy, and a few asked for help with math homework. Many of these writers included money, and over the next year, $4,000 worth. July 2012, Dr. Jonathan Woodcock, a defense expert, briefly examined Holmes. He had intended to see Holmes again on July 30th, but he did not return for 3 years. His observations would not be disclosed to the prosecution. The visit confused everyone, including James Holmes, who mistakenly thought that Dr. Woodcock was his clinical psychiatrist. However, Dr. Woodcock was there for forensic purposes to assess Holmes's psychiatric and medical condition and to determine his competency to stand trial. This misunderstanding left Holmes without psychiatric care for months. Competency to stand trial evaluates the defendant's current ability to understand and participate in a trial. This is very different from the criminal insanity evaluation, which determines a perpetrator's mental state and ability to be responsible at the time of the alleged crime. Prompt assessment of Holmes's medical condition by Dr. Woodcock was essential, coming just a day or so after the shooting. But Dr. Woodcock's examination had several problems. The defense had restricted him on the topics he could discuss with Holmes, which undermined the validity of his opinions. He also allowed a defense representative to participate in the evaluation, which is inappropriate for forensic psychiatry. Finally, despite his expertise and respect in the practice, Dr. Woodcock was not forensically trained, having no experience in assessing criminal defendants. Woodcock also lacked access to essential resources, like files or transcripts, leaving him woefully uninformed. He was literally flying blind. A qualified forensic psychiatrist would have conducted a very different interview. Showing symptoms of severe mental illness, Holmes's affect was flat, unemotional, reflecting no empathy for the victims. Woodcock would call this the, quote, dissociation of affect, end quote, where painful memories are blocked from the conscious mind. Further, Woodcock diagnosed Holmes with anxiety disorder, schizoaffective disorder, including mood instability, depression, mania, antisocial personality disorder, and disordered thinking. Woodcock's report was submitted to the defense 3 years later. A clinical psychiatrist from corrections, Dr. Edwin Moser, came to assess Holmes, but Holmes refused to speak with him as Dr. Woodcock was his psychiatrist. Dr. Moser tried to reach out to Dr. Woodcock to confirm that Holmes was receiving proper treatment, and he did not get a response. In the media feeding frenzy, feeling exposed and her life threatened, Dr. Lynne Fenton left the state to hide out with family and eventually resigned as the head of student mental health, realizing she couldn't support her students while cowering at her brothers. Regaining some footing, she would return to the nightmare, addressing a plethora of legal matters as death threats continued. She was fitted for a bulletproof vest, wearing it every time she left her house. A month later, the Denver Post published a headline stating, "CU psychiatrist who treated Holmes is highly respected and liked," as a colleague granted an interview to show some public support. She learned that the University of Colorado was launching an investigation into Holmes, requiring Dr. Fenton's cooperation. The interrogation was brutal, raking Lynne over the coals, insulting her education, and every choice she made regarding Holmes. And she would only find out the results of this inquiry if she was not exonerated. Her life now in a free fall. And then all the documents from this mysteriously vanished, and the lack of closure felt like a gut punch. Quote, "For months, I'd worried I'd be fired, my reputation ruined. I wasn't sure I'd even still have patients when it was all over, if it was ever over. And if it was never over, who would I be?" End quote. Again, the lives that were ruined because of the actions of one man. My heart breaks for how massive these events are. I am not equating the loss of a career with the loss of beloved ones, but that's not the point. What is the point is the ripples in this pond go far wider than we realized and were far more destructive than we may have envisioned. And side note, there is a severe blood shortage. If you can donate, please do. I just donated Power Red, and there's a link to the Red Cross on my blog. And that concludes episode 132, Ultraception, part 2 of A Dark Night in Aurora by Dr. William H. Reed. Next, my final episode, part 3 of this trilogy on the trial, the aftermath of the shooting, and updates will drop in 2 weeks. Tough story. Oh my gosh. Thank you for listening. I really appreciate your support. And thank you to my amazing Patreon murder bookies. Our next book is A Tangled Web, a cyberstalker, a deadly obsession, and a twisting path to justice by Leslie Rule. On a bleak and chilly November day in 2012, 37-year-old Carrie Farver vanished without a trace from her life in Omaha, Nebraska. Shocking everyone, she quit her job and left her young son behind, igniting a firestorm of concern and speculation. Yet her mother, Nancy Rainey, steadfastly refused to accept that her daughter had simply walked away from everything she loved. Brace yourself for one of the most intricate and bewildering true crime stories I have ever encountered. Thank you for listening. I see you as you hear me. If you enjoy the podcast, please share it and help me make new murder bookies and leave a positive 5-star review. You can contact me at jill@murdershelfbookclub.com or connect with me on X, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Additionally, you can join Patreon for $4 a month to help choose the next book I will feature. See you in 2 weeks, murder bookies.
In the heartland of America, where the Great Plains stretch far and wide, lies a region shrouded in mystery, where the unsolved and the unknown linger. Welcome to Cold Case Kansas, the true crime podcast that delves into the unsolved cases across Kansas and its surrounding states. This podcast was born out of a personal quest for justice. My friend Krista Martin's 34-year-old unsolved case was finally cracked, and in it we found answers. Now we want to help others. We'll explore the crimes that have haunted communities for decades, searching for answers and seeking justice. Join me on this journey as we shed light on the cold cases that have gone unsolved for far too long. Cold Case Kansas, seeking justice one case at a time. You can find us wherever you stream podcasts. You can also find us on TikTok, Threads, Facebook, Instagram. If it's social media, you can find us there.
Like and subscribe.
Written and produced by Jill, all rights reserved. Music, The Pewter Elephant by Blue Dot Sessions.